Welcome to the PantheonPlus Rewind. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of The Rewind. As always, I'm joined by my compadres, Theric and Omega Contagion, on our quest to provide the Pantheon and MMO RPG community with what we hope to be some form of entertainment. How you gentlemen doing today?
Another day in quarantine paradise, my friend.
Yeah, pretty much that's it.
Well, we could talk all day about that, so let's not. It's good to hear you guys are surviving. Let's get this party started. This week in Visionary Realms news and notes. So as always, let's go ahead and jump into the Pantheon VR Twitter, which this week they had a couple of really good questions here, and I'm curious on what you guys think about it as well. The first one they talked about was class balance, and they worded their question like this. How important is it that there is balance among classes? Should some classes be better than others in different areas, or should they all be equal in your opinion? I'm actually going to start with my response here. I actually, in all caps, put different exclamation point. It is okay to have a weakness. That's why you need a group. Every class should have strengths and weaknesses. Make it a good reason to swap to support DPS on a warrior so that a paladin can tank, for example, and then switch back for a different fight. This is what makes it a team. And I'll ask your guys' feedback in just a few seconds here, but let me read through some other people in the community and what they had to say. IP Dre said all classes should excel in certain functions and fall short in others. Without this, there is a natural degradation that is developed within the game and can only be resolved by being developed out. Don't develop in unnecessary limitations to the game's creativity. Basgrim said, some classes should be better at certain things, but a different class should always be equally better at a different thing. So kind of still talking about balance, resulting in both classes being equally desirable without actually being equal. Man, read that 5 times fast. If every class is functionally the same, then you might as well only have one class, which I agree with that last line tremendously. And he's making some good points there. And he actually had a response that I liked. It's from Jan Debris. He says, or she says, balance is mainly for PvP, in my opinion. Since I really dislike PvP and MMORPGs, I don't care about balance. Synergy is greater than balance. Trying to balance classes for PvP will inevitably break classes in PvE. So if you really want that to go away, please make 2 separate skill sets altogether. That's an argument I've made quite a bit and I won't get into today because that is a can of worms for Minus talking PvP. The next person here goes by at Tomahawk77. He says, depends on what you mean by balance. Should a paladin heal as good as a cleric? No, they have different roles. But what about druids then? Preferably, but just different styles. Should wizards and rogues be balanced DPS-wise? Probably. That would allow people to play what they like. Ashley said, and she goes by at Scriptomancer, I dislike the idea of class balance and that it makes all the classes feel the same. It's boring. That all classes are unique and viable is a great concept, but easier said than done. Because everyone wants to be able, she says, because everyone wants everything to be different, but also desirable. There's bound to be tons. Let's see, and Nefel, who's well known, he's in the Pantheon Crafters. He runs that. He's a big time piece of the community. He said, I think the better, in quotes, better, needs to be situational between classes in the same role. Where games have stumbled is when they have one class that is better at something in nearly all situations, or when we have one class with a utility or control aspect that is seen as more useful. And then the last one here I'm going to read is from Jimmy Lee Lingle. I really like this one. He just put rock, paper, scissors is balance. And I love that line. Theric, what are your thoughts on this whole balance, equality thing in the classes?
I think I'm pretty much in line with what the community, and I think all those responses are pretty much on the same page if I'm reading them correctly. Class balance, just there doesn't need to be class balance in a group-based game. This is really fundamental to what Pantheon's going for, is to create deficits in classes' abilities so that you need other people, other classes to accomplish the tasks that you want to accomplish. I'll also add that, having classes be different and different strengths adds so much more content from the standpoint of I want to play this class. No, I want to try a different class, and it plays completely differently and can do different things that my other class couldn't or couldn't do. So I think that's, but I think it does come back to the fundamental issue of grouping and the necessity of grouping.
Yeah, without a doubt. Omega, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I pretty much mirror everything that you guys have said and everything in the community these posts have said. Like, I think having unique classes and having their own flavor is more important than like number to number balance. And I really like what Jan Debris said, like synergy is more important than balance. And, you know, I couldn't agree more. If you have cool classes that work together, like the Druid and the other healers, how they work together, like I think that is way more interesting from a gameplay point of view rather than having a Druid heal for the exact same math as a cleric. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, you know, we've talked about it before about the term I like to use that gets me in trouble called player jealousy. You know, if somebody can do something better than you, it's okay. This is a team-based game. You can't do everything. And if there's a tank who tanks a fight better than you, then oh well, right? Like have the flexibility to be able to pull off another role in a way at least that allows you to get through the content, which I believe this game is going to allow you to do. Sort of how I said, you know, maybe a paladin's better for one fight than a warrior. So in that fight that the warrior is there and not mean tanking, well, drop in and put a little bit of different gear on and have yourself ready to do a little bit more DPS. Sure, you're not going to be a rogue. You're not going to be a wizard. But at the same time, I think people are so afraid of the term meta, which again, I believe comes from player jealousy, and people wanting to be in groups that they don't deserve to be in or they're not welcome in, which is okay. Find a guild, find people to play with who take you for what you are, and then they'll make it work for you. Like this whole fear of if somebody in the general chat saying, you know, looking for a tank for so-and-so fight, no warriors. And then that people look at that like, oh, a warrior's the worst. And I just think that that's such a wrong way to look at this. I think that the cooperative side needs to be more valued than the competitive side. And I know that as gamers, the competitive side has grown quite a bit, but it doesn't change the fact on what's important. So I don't know, I could go on for days about that, but I don't know if you guys have anything else to say before I jump to the next one.
I think you summed it up for me.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I just want to, you know, kind of touch on the competitive side and the competitive nature of gamers. And that's like why I don't like things like DPS meters and leaderboards and, you know, the playing the meta and that type of thing. It forces people to, you know, not necessarily do what they want to do. And it leads to that mentality that like, you know, we need a tank, but not a warrior because the warrior sucks. And it's just like the warrior doesn't suck. You just haven't learned how to play it properly or like integrate it properly with your group. And it leaves people afraid to try new things because they just want to be the best and do it the fastest rather than explore a game, because that's all modern MMOs are. Like you're just all doing DPS and you're doing it as fast as possible.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a big difference between conquering a challenge ahead of you and taking the easiest path. And people are
Right.
really tied into taking this easiest path when that's not the only way to get there. So,
Yeah, sometimes it's the less rewarding path, right? Like, don't take
Oh
the
yeah.
easiest path all the time. Take the more difficult path and see what happens, right?
exactly. Well, the next topic here was puzzles. So, VR put out on Twitter, do you like solving in game puzzles? And if so, what types of puzzles do you like the best or consider to be the most enjoyable / challenging? I'm going to start with a response from Micah, who says puzzles can be fun or just annoying if you look at jumping puzzles. I have done raids where the boss defeated by solving a puzzle instead of combat, and it was a breath of fresh air. So it really does depend on the puzzle. Jumping puzzles, as I said before, can die in a fire. Electric Andy says, not all jumping puzzles are nice. I like to jump in games, not in real life. If I did, there would be earthquake warnings all day, he says. But I really hate jumping puzzles. Tess says, I love puzzles. I prefer mind puzzles over jumping puzzles. Although they can still be fun, the only kind of puzzle I don't really enjoy are trivia puzzles, mainly because they don't challenge the participant to think outside of the box, but just to regurgitate information. Alicera, who's a WoW streamer, is going to be streaming Pantheon. Awesome streamer. She's super cool. She says, yes, it's going to be so much fun to encounter mini game type puzzles. Basgrim said, I love all sorts of puzzles. It's nice change of pace from fighting things to advance. See DDO puzzles in dungeons done right. And I think we can comment on that the puzzles in DDO have been really cool. So
Absolutely.
but it's great because the response that Basgrim got immediately after, again from Tomahawk77, who we talked about earlier, he said, DDO is a damn puzzle menace. Which I love. I just picture him saying that. Like, look at his picture, just a damn menace. It's great. Drac Attack said, is there a way to make puzzles alternate so they can't just be insta-solved by a forum post? If so, I'm in. And it's interesting because Dayhawk also said this something similar. He said, yes, however, one of the reasons why I dislike them in MMOs is that once it's figured out and the answer becomes known, the puzzles become moot. There's a way to figure out how to randomize the puzzles so that daily or randomly become active, then I think the value goes up. And that's a really interesting thing. I've never actually thought about that, so it's kind of funny. So before I jump to you guys, the funny takeaways here was nothing was said about jumping puzzles, and everybody wanted to make sure that they knew that they really hated jumping puzzles, which I think is hilarious. That's great. And then this whole talk of them changing, so you're not just, once you do it once, you're done. And that's a pretty interesting concept. In DDO, we saw the things like tiles that you can spin around and set up differently. If when you go into certain areas, the problem is the game isn't instanced, right? So, like, how would it change? Do you hit a button on the wall and the puzzle develops in front of you, maybe? And then, maybe certain pieces that turn or spin are different. That kind of thing could be pretty cool. So there could definitely be ways to do it, even though it's not instanced, by having some kind of button or activation switch do it. But that's an interesting concept, and I wonder how feasible that would be. Omega, are you a fan of puzzles? Do you want to see what like this type of thing in, and what do you like and dislike?
I love puzzles. I like riddles, especially. There's some pretty easy riddles in Guild Wars 2 for a couple quests. But those are a lot of fun. I don't mind like the plumber pipe puzzles like from DDO and stuff, but those are generally kind of easy to figure out. Except that one that we did with Roenick on that stream, like that one just came together completely randomly. Like people were just running around hitting stuff. I don't know how we solved that one.
The same thing.
Yeah. But in terms of puzzles these days, like I really agree that there has to be some sort of system to make them change from day to day or every time you try it. I think Destiny 1 and 2 did that really well in their raids. And it wasn't so much that the thing you had to figure out was difficult, but it was a reaction thing, like you were running through this outer ring in one of the raids and the floor was falling away behind you. And there was walls in front of you. And as you're running up to the wall, a certain hole in the wall would light up or something like that. And you had to jump through that hole rather than go through a different path. So it was a reaction puzzle that was kind of random. Not exactly a puzzle, but something that you interacted with. And it was great. I think Destiny did that kind of stuff really well. And every MMO can take some hints from them in that regard.
Eric, what about you?
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna go against the stream here, and I'm gonna say I really dislike puzzles in MMOs. Not only jumping puzzles, which are terrible, but things like we talked. You guys both mentioned the DDO puzzle, and when we were doing that puzzle, I kind of thought like it was. First of all, it wasn't very challenging. I mean, it was kind of random, but I don't think they fit well in MMOs. Now, specifically that kind of a puzzle maybe doesn't fit. Maybe there is a type of puzzle that does fit. I'm thinking something like, one person has to be on one side of the dungeon to hit a switch and the other person has to be on the other side of the dungeon, and then your group has to fight, together to get back to the place where you all need to be. I could see something like that being enjoyable. But when you talk about puzzles and you're sort of thinking along the lines of like you said, Omega, the pipes puzzles type stuff, I don't think it works in MMOs, to be honest. I love them in single player games. I'm a big fan of like Tomb Raider style puzzles in single player games, but not in MMOs. I kind of feel like they don't fit, but maybe that's just me.
I think the best puzzle I've ever seen in a game, or at least the most enjoyable for me, was in Uncharted, those PS4 games.
Right.
And you were in this room that had all these broken statues, and it was like very Greek looking. They were all in poses of combat and stuff like that. And then there was a light source, or you had the light source on you. I can't remember, but you had to walk around and just find the right viewing angle so that the light source shined through these statues to cast a very specific shadow on the wall. And the shadow was like of these two statues clashing. But, you had to figure it out just visually, and you didn't really understand what you were looking for until you found it. And yeah, it's one of the greatest puzzles I've ever played.
Yeah, I
And
love stuff like that.
yeah, in terms of jumping, I think the problem with jumping puzzles in MMOs is that jumping has never been done in a very good way. It really is always an afterthought. And maybe in Pantheon it'll be a bit different because, you can climb and grab onto things. But, jumping in Destiny, for example, is awesome. It's fluid, and you can kind of get a feeling for your character as you progress of what you can and can't do. And in MMOs, like, it's just always so random, I think there's a large degree of error when you hit that jump key.
Yeah. Well, maybe, you mentioned climbing. Maybe this whole new climbing revelation about how everything is climbable opens up the door for some interesting puzzles in Pantheon. Who knows? But
Yeah.
in like those puzzles you were describing, Omega, I love those too. But again, I like them in single player games. I don't think they
Right.
work that well in MMOs. But
One thing that you can really do possibly, like you guys were saying, is like the group puzzles, especially
Yeah.
if you want to, they don't want to have instances, but they do want to have certain things locked behind doors and such. So if you had a puzzle that required 4 people to get it done, then, a duo group can't sneak in there and start doing damage, for example. Like if you had, like you said, kind of 2 areas where people have to stand on a switch, a door opens, then those people can open the door from behind to bring in the rest of the people. That kind of thing would be pretty neat. And since the game is group oriented, it gives you a good reason to have these group quests that, a single or solo player can't get through, or even a duo. Like that area is made for the 4-man, 5-man group. So you could do some pretty interesting things and really stand behind. Well, this is a group based game, right? So
Yeah. And I love when games split the group up temporarily. Like,
I was
it's
gonna
such
say
a
that too.
tense moment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, where you have to decide like what part of the group's going to go left, what part of the group's going to go right, what's your strategy around that, where's the healer going, where's the tank going? Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you finally get back together, it's just like, oh my God, thank God.
I can agree with that. And the only other thing is obviously we had the dev stream, but we're going to talk a little bit about that in the creators area. So I'll save some of that information for a little bit later in the podcast here. So I'm going to go ahead and say that's it for the VR news and notes. When the community speaks, we listen. Let's dig into social media and see what they're talking about.
So this week, we are going to go over to PantheonMMO.com as we do, and I want to talk about a post in the general discussion forum, and it's entitled, Not Everything About the Good Old Days Was Good. And this was created by Vander. He was inspired to start the discussion after watching a video by Basgram about why the term old school gets sort of thrown around a little bit too much when it comes to Pantheon. I'll leave a link to the video in the description, but Vander's post generated nearly 4 pages of discussion, and there were some really excellent points made. So here's what Vander wrote, and I'm going to paraphrase it just a little bit for the sake of time and clarity. He said, first, I'd like to talk about the term old school, how it relates to Pantheon. Now, I need to talk about the term old school because I think it goes hand in hand with the term the good old days. When I was a child, my grandparents used to tell me that not everything about the good old days was that good. Not having air conditioning or indoor plumbing and even electricity wasn't a good thing. So with that said, when people like myself use the term old school, we don't mean we want all the bad things that since have been greatly improved upon. When I say old school, I'm talking about a slower pace, bringing back the teamwork and the need to talk to each other, and in turn making friends. So he used one of the examples Vander used in his post is corpse runs. That's something that can basically be left in the past, right? Not something that needs to be brought forward because it didn't really add anything to the experience and in fact detracted from the experience. And the ensuing comments did get a little fixated on how Pantheon should deal with corpse runs, but Vander chimed in again to sort of remind folks it's just an example. And the greater discussion was basically being able to discern what was and what wasn't worth bringing back from the past. So here's some of the responses that helped differentiate the good from the bad and what old school is all about. So Unicron said, it's not an uncommon sentiment, and I think that's what the devs have been saying since the beginning. The goal of Pantheon is to return to old school in terms of social gameplay, not a carbon copy of EverQuest. Disposalist said it's a very tricky line to walk, though, because between improving on old school and adding in conveniences and other features that are to the detriment of the good side of old school. So personally, I think as long as the devs keep in mind that we want Pantheon to be, and I bolded this, challenging and to encourage and even require community and to maintain an immersive experience, they can't go too far wrong. Nafel, who we heard from earlier, said, I think the best thing we can all do on these forums when we talk about something like this is to make sure we're being specific, because labels like old school and hardcore, we run into problems because that means different things to different people. And I really liked the example he gave here. It's the willingness to group up with strangers. That's something that needs to be brought back. Yes, it's the dreaded pickup group that we've all had experiences for good and for bad with. Something that, so this is Nafel saying this, is something more recent and the more accessible games, in quotes, have really trained us not to do, I'm afraid. The worst part about it is that when you've been avoiding randoms for years, and because they were more or less guaranteed to be a terrible person, or maybe children, or maybe even both, it's really hard to break the habit when you try to do it now. And Disposalist added into this saying, a social game is not one you just play with your friends. It's one where you play with strangers and become friends. And I really like that. That sentiment. We've all had good and bad experiences, like I said, with the pugs, but we have to not be afraid to go that route again. Another person said, when I think of old school or harken back to it, I think of the social aspects. And another thing that I think of is the pacing of the encounters. So slowing things down, right? Big Dog Chris said, I believe what separates a new school from old school MMOs are player conveniences. Role-playing and character development are about all the little pieces that make up the whole of your character. More modern games make a lot of assumptions and removes that aspect, giving you a generic character and focuses more on giving you things to do, which I think is absolutely true. Counterfletch said, I think most people, myself included, agree with the idea that we want the feel of those old MMOs, but we also recognize they had weaknesses, and we aren't insisting all those little annoyances deliberately be programmed in just to sort of make it quote unquote old school. Renaria said, I agree it's important to look at the systems and make sure they actually make sense, but it is a slippery slope when you start talking about inconveniences. And then somebody else, Zorkon, took this a little further. He actually divided it into 3 separate levels of what's like conveniences versus, flat out disappointment. He said there is a need for there to be some tediousness, some inconvenience, and some flat out disappointments, because it's a matter of how much. And VR knows this, and he's sort of saying, as long as they have some tolerance for what people are going to be critical of in that regard, it'll have that old school feel. Fazul said, these things we call quote-unquote conveniences, like in-game maps, auto-looting, instant travel, etc., are like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Any one of these considered alone doesn't break the game. You slowly bleed the virtual world away and are left with a video game corpse. So I think that's a really interesting way of putting it. Bear said, one good thing about the good old days is having to wait on a boat, not because it was more immersive or slow, but because waiting is intrinsically more engaging, and you get to find, when you finally get on the boat, there were several people there and you talk to them. Crazy said, I'll be honest, the good old problems are what brought us together. Most of what was in EQ from alpha and beta and onwards made the game fun, bugs and all, because we socialized with people and or group members. And our buddy Old Wargoat summed it up with one line: the boss fight everyone had a hard time defeating. So I'm guessing he wants that to be brought back from the old school. So you can see there's some common themes throughout these comments. Social gameplay, challenge, keeping some of the old inconveniences in, but not all. And mostly those which facilitated people coming together. So what do you guys think? What's one thing from the good old days that you think should be in Pantheon? Minus, we'll start with you.
Well, I think the biggest thing, obviously everything we do is based around community here, right? So it'd be silly not to say that the community aspects, the social aspects, that's what's most important. But it's funny because this all started off with that term old school or hardcore. And I've been saying for a long time that Pantheon is going to be a modern MMORPG. The problem is when people hear modern MMORPG, they think WoW and they think of all the games like that, for example. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is modern as in the real definition of the word, which means current. There's an old meme that goes around with Doc Brown from Back to the Future. And he has the timelines that he explains to Marty. And it says that, there's a completely different timeline that branches off the moment that the time travel happened. Well, what we need to do is we need to branch off a timeline from when EQ and WoW, came to be. And WoW took this timeline, to one way, and we need to go back to that split, and we need to create a new modern timeline that keeps the social aspects, that keeps the challenge, that keeps the ability to want to communicate and have personal responsibility within the game, which I think is super important. But we do need modernization of systems, and we do need new concepts and new surprises. We can't just use what EQ was and make a new game, because you're not going to be excited. It's not going to be new. And there's nothing, the reason we're not playing EQ still, or we don't go back to some of the MMOs we enjoyed, is because we've already done it. We've already experienced what they have to offer, and we may love it, but we don't stay, because ultimately when you play an MMORPG, and as Brad said, he makes worlds, not games. When you're in the world, it's about discovery. It's about exploration. If you take away discovery of the world and exploration, the game isn't that fun anymore. So we don't want just some rehash of EQ. In my personal opinion, we want something inspired by it. And I think that's what Pantheon's going to be. It is going to be a modern MMORPG inspired by the things we miss, not the things that have made games money currently. Very long-winded answer there, Theric, but that's kind of my thoughts on it.
That's well said. Omega, what about you?
Yeah, like I have limited experience in these old school feeling MMOs. Most of my stuff is the modern stuff with a lot of conveniences and stuff. But one of the old school MMOs I did play was Star Wars Galaxies, and a very fond memory of mine is waiting for a transport, like Bear said, waiting for a boat. In Star Wars case, like I was waiting for a starship to go to another planet. And that was a great moment, like a 15-minute window to just hang out there, talk to people that were there. People were giving out buffs. Some people were selling them, because that was a big thing in that game. And it made that world just feel populated. It made it feel like there was a real community there, and we were all kind of doing the same thing. We were all waiting for this boat or ship. So I think when Pantheon and other games, they go down this route of thinking about, okay, like what sort of system should we bring in? Like really going back to the thought of what will this do to the community, both negative and positive. And as long as they keep that social aspect and that community in mind, then I'm not too concerned about things like auto looting and instant travel and stuff like that, because I know Pantheon is coming at that from a very group community oriented thing, and as long as they do that, I think it'll be great.
Yeah, it's like somebody else said, as long as they stay true to the sort of the vision and the focus that they've talked about, it will be hard to sort of stray too far from the path, I think. So yeah, so good points, guys. Next up, we want to go to the introductions section of the forums and say hello to a new member of the community. The Goose jumped into the forums with the following introduction. He said, "Hey, I'm new to the forums after having watched the development of the game for almost 2 years now. I decided to drop some cash I've saved up on a pledge. Brain says no, something else says yes." His background in MMOs starts in 2009 with the Wrath of the Lich King expansion for WoW. He was 9 years old at the time, started out as a human mage, not really understanding the game or how questing worked, but managed to stumble out of the starting area into Goldshire, and from there into Duskwood, where he got spooked, quit the game after dying to mobs, and did not return to the launch of Classic. He's played, most of the other modern MMOs as well, including some what he called cash grab MMOs on mobile. He mostly likes to play DPS casters. He has a level 60 mage in Classic WoW and a level 60 warlock in Classic as well. He likes that style of play. He's thinking about playing a human summoner in Pantheon, I guess. So he says he's a very human-centric person when it comes to MMOs. So hope to see everybody in game is what he says at the end. So drop into the forums and give him a welcome if you have the time. And from there, we will go over to Reddit, to the PantheonMMO subreddit. And Sparks Interface was back this week with another really, really good poll question, sort of thinking outside the box with this one, which is the kind of stuff I really like. He said, should individual character height factor into combat, assuming you can customize every race's height up or down during character creation? So, for example, taller characters would be innately stronger and hit harder, whereas shorter characters would be more agile and have better evasion. And it was a yes or no question. At the end of the week, there were about 80 votes. 70% of people said no. 30% of people said yes. So here's some of the things people brought to the discussion about this. Our buddy Eric I just said, nope, height should be cosmetic only. Janice said no, everyone would pick male and scale to the tallest height unless they were a rogue. He noted that in real life, being taller doesn't necessarily mean you're less agile or dexterous, except maybe for acrobatics. It depends on what the defining quality of, for example, rogues in Pantheon is going to be. Is it more important to be evasive, whereas shorter would be better? Or is it more important to have a high damage output, so taller being better? He remembered barbarian rogues in EverQuest were all about strength, and therefore they were really good because that was sort of more the focus in EverQuest was having the damage output for the rogue. And he's seeing sort of the same thing for Pantheon's rogue. TR DeLacy said, interesting idea. I voted yes, as it would be more customization per class and race. And I believe the size difference should also impact melee range. That's kind of a cool idea. So like somebody who's taller, maybe with longer arms, having a greater melee range. The Green Eagle said, super interesting idea, and I definitely think that size of the race should matter of these things. I'd be down to see something like this, like a size slider you're describing, but I don't think it could ever be balanced properly in an MMO context. Xantub said no, because you're making specific races better at certain classes, and thus nobody would invite a dwarf warrior over a barbarian warrior, unless you mean that the max height dwarf is just as strong as the max height barbarian. But I'd still rather see it just as cosmetic. And Sparks Interface jumped in to sort of clarify that is what he was sort of meaning in the second half of what the comment was, how it wouldn't make any one class inherently better than other classes. They wouldn't get a bigger bonus. The bonus would be the same. It's just a matter of for that particular class. The Lost Cause had a really interesting twist on this question, sort of turning it around. He said, if you get to distribute stats when you're making your character, I'm cool with those stats influencing the height or the build. I don't think it should work the other way around. So that's really interesting, and that would be kind of unique. I can't think of any games that have done that. And then last up, Stonefish said yes, variation all the way. So I voted no in the poll, and it's mainly based on lore reasons, because if this were to be the case, it would imply that height has the same impact on all the races. So, for example, the lore tells us the Archai are quite physically large, but they don't suffer any loss of agility or dexterity because of that. Another example, the gnomes, they're incorporeal. They don't have a physical body, so why would height have an impact on their strength or agility? It's similar basically to what Janice was saying, how, applying real life physics, sometimes it's better to suspend the physics of the real world. And that really allows the fantasy of the game to flourish. But I'm definitely interested in what you guys think. How would you have voted in this one? Omega, would you have voted yes or no?
In terms of any game that I would want to play, I'm a hard no. I think that's a terrible idea. And it comes down to a couple things, but for me, it's just, I think people would inherently follow a meta, which I hate lots and lots. And kind of like what, I can't remember who said it now, maybe Janice, about ruining the fantasy of certain classes or certain things. And like, there's some people who play MMOs specifically to really escape the things they don't like about real life, so they can play someone else or be something else. And if someone who's like a big, tall, 7 foot, lanky, cumbersome person in the real world, but they really want to be a badass warrior in this game, but they want to be small because, they're not that. They get that taken away from them. And I think having the fantasy of role playing is really important.
Yeah, good point. What about you, Minus?
I voted no, and it was before Sparks clarified that each race would still get the same benefits, but I said no because one of my fondest memories of EQ was the gnome warrior you'd see very rarely, but you called him a giant slayer, and I'm like, no, I love that, no, I don't like it. I'm all into cosplay-ish stuff in the game. I don't want to say like I sit and roleplay, but I like to have my character look away. And I do think that no matter what people think of the term role-playing, you do role-play your character, you just may not act it out. Your character is still a character in the world.
Right.
So no, I don't like that one. It's an interesting conversation point. And I actually asked later, I said, well, if someone had a grow or shrink spell, does that impact those stats at that point? So
Interesting.
kind of going a little forward with it. But no, I'm not a big fan of that.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, and we will finish up over on Facebook. This week, William Marshall asked a pretty simple question. He said, what do you prefer, casual family guilds or raiding guilds? And it was actually split pretty evenly amongst the responses. And some people said they like both. But there was one response that stuck out to me, and I really like how he said this. This is from Joseph Watson. He said, a true progression guild. I'm not exactly sure when it happened in the MMORPG community, but at some point progression became synonymous with hardcore, when in fact it's the opposite. Gear your folks, learn their strengths and weaknesses, help people, play together a lot so you build team cohesion and synergy. The rest will follow, and people will have a good time. I've always felt the best mix is mainly working class folks who really enjoy the game as a whole, with a few hardcore-ish types mixed in to keep us on the straight and narrow. You need a few mama bears and papa bears in there as well to keep people civil. Support your crafters. Also, you must enjoy doing drunk runs. If anyone is starting a guild, such as I've described, I'm your guy. And I agree with that too. That's the kind of guild that I'd like to sort of be in as well. And I want to point out there was one more response, and this was from some really old curmudgeon. He said, I enjoy a more casual guild, but not family oriented. I can't stand to play with games with anyone under the age of at least 27. So tell us, Omega, have you yelled at any kids to get off your lawn today? Because that was you.
Yeah, I'm that guy sitting in the rocking chair with the salt gun, stay the hell off my property. No, I just, I don't like the risk of playing with kids. I shouldn't really say risk, but I like to be able to say and do what I want, in terms of swearing. I'm pretty tame on these recorded things, but when I'm just playing a game, like I drop an absurd amount of F-bombs, I'm sure. And I like people around my own age range because we can talk about things outside of the game. I like people who grew up in the 90s like I did, because music is a really big part of my life, and I really like 90s punk, so I like to talk about that stuff. And I find that playing with young people, like I said, like 27 and under, because I'm 35. I'm not super old, but I'm in the middle range, I think, of a lot of the MMO players for Pantheon. And yeah, it's just more of the people that I can get along with easily, rather than listen to some 14-year-old pump really bad music in the background and listening to him like eat Cheetos without muting his mic because he just doesn't understand how the internet works. And I could go on a long rant about that kind of stuff, but that's mostly the thing, is that like I like people around my own age range because they like the same things that I do.
Yeah, well, I agree. I'm in the same boat. I mean, I don't think I could be in a guild with a bunch of and young people are great and whatever, but it is important that you're able to sort of find that common ground in your group, in your guild.
Yeah,
that Joseph Watson shout out, man. You just completely nailed what I believe a guild should be like. Some good stuff there.
I know, 100% for sure. I know, I noticed it too. And that's it for this week's community discussions.
Just what are those creators up to out there?
Right, so let's start with PantheonPlus, as we always do. Just talk a little bit about what we did this week and what's coming forward. First, we've been playing some Rift, and I got to tell you guys, I'm really surprised. Our community is really enjoying Rift. We've streamed all the dungeons so far that we can get to by like the mid to high 30s. And even though we hop around a lot in MMORPGs as a community, I think this might actually become a regular. So if you're trying to be Pantheon patient and hang out with the community, create a character on the Rift Deepwood server. Mostly we're playing Guardians, but it's been pretty fun. I think the two mainstays so far are going to be Rift and DDO from everything that we jump around and play. But if anyone likes to jump around and play games, and again, you're just trying to hang out with the Pantheon fan base and the community, come on and hang out with us. So I did talk earlier that the developer stream did happen. So if you're listening to this, you probably already know that. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but the stream was very good. Had a very good flow and talked about some important things to check out. And of course, right after that, we did our PantheonPlus U and recapped it. And we had a really great crowd this week with lots of opinions being shared. And a big takeaway from me, we actually clipped out a piece of, we're calling it Theory Crafting Japa, where he says we're getting super close and we're all analyzing his facial expressions. How close is it? What does that mean? But we had a lot of fun with that. And we also had another really cool night. We played some DDO, and we actually did a game night with Ronick from VR. You guys might know him as well as David Schlau. But we had a really great time playing with him. We did some hard dungeons in DDO. There was tons of dying, but I have to give a shout out that Ronick had a heroic redemption moment. We all died, Ronick included. And that's the best part. It's that this clip starts with Ronick dying, which is hilarious. He uses a resurrection cake, which you really only get one of unless you go buy more. And he gets up and says, "Don't worry, guys, I have a cake, but we're all dead." And we're sitting there and we're like, well, what's that going to do? Because now he's in this dungeon. We're all dead. He has to find a way to get all our corpses to a resurrection shrine, which we haven't seen and have no idea where it's at. Add to that, there's enemies everywhere. So it's like, well, you just use your cake and you're just going to die. And he goes, no, I can sneak. I can sneak. So he sneaks and immediately goes, they saw me. He starts getting attacked. It's such a funny clip. It's really short. Check it out on our YouTube, or you can find it on our Twitter. But he actually trained a ton of skeletons and found a resurrection area. We all rezzed. We had this big combat fight with the skeletons, cleared them all, and he saved the day. So Ronick, a little bit of redemption for a guy who gets blamed dying all the time. He's really trying to bring the thunder, and he did a pretty good job. But I also want to thank him because he did tell us a little bit about his experiences, talks about what it was like to work at VR and like when he started there and how he did. So there's definitely some interesting things you guys can pick up from on that stream if you want to check it out again on Twitch. And the last thing I want to throw it out there is we were really hoping to have our website out by the end of this weekend. It might still happen. Poiru is really hard at work today, which we actually record this on a Saturday. So if you're hearing it, he was really hard at work yesterday. But there is a good chance we're going to still get it out this weekend. But if not, it should be by the middle of next week. What's delaying us is we're really trying to make sure that we have the community aspects that we want in there. So we're working on a voting system and a commenting system for any of the media on the site. And we think it's important because if you're going to join the site, like you need to have something to do. In the future, we're going to have forums and we're going to have some profile stuff you're able to do and some friending and some messaging of each other. Like all that's going to come in future, but we wanted to have something. So we want to make sure that's good. And we have a little bit of like a checklist to complete with cleanup. So hopefully, if not this weekend, you guys will see it by midweek. I hope. Moving over to Basgrim, he did announce that he hasn't been doing a lot of content because he's been really busy, but he is in the process of revamping his channel and what his channel looks like and some of his strategies. So we should see an updated feel coming from Basgrim here shortly. But he was able to actually host a viewing party, which you can check out on his YouTube for the developer stream where he reacts to it and talks to the community. And then 2 from NathanNapalm this week. He got called out on our run with Ronick. He's like, oh, so you're necroing old posts there, huh? But he found a post from 2016 from Ronick where Ronick talked about how griefing is actually a part of what made the old MMO experience. Ronick was pretty funny because he immediately responded to it and said, this isn't how VR thinks, but I stand by it. And he talked a little bit on the stream, but I thought it was pretty funny. He's like, oh, what's Nathan doing to me here? And then right after we were done with the developer stream, Nathan put a video out for climbing, really talking into that phrase that Joppa used, that he was really excited and saying everything is now climbable. So he breaks that down in his video if you want to talk a little bit more theory craft with him about what climbing is going to bring to the game. And that's it for the content creators this week.
The plus in Pantheon Plus. Here's your MMORPG news.
All right, so time for the genre news. There was quite a bit that happened this week in the news, but life got pretty busy for me near the end of the week. I didn't have as much time to compile everything that I wanted to, so I kind of took the bits that were most interesting to me, and hopefully you guys find some of it cool too. First up, Ashes of Creation. They had their monthly development update this past Thursday, and it was pretty great, actually. I had my own personal worries that after last month being such an amazing one with the Alpha 1 preview, that this month was going to be pretty light. But happy surprise, there was a ton of great info there. While I watched, it was kind of hard to focus on what they were always talking about because I was really busy analyzing the gameplay that was being shown in the background over top of the discussion. But I did catch a few things that really took me back down the path to the hype train for this one. There really isn't time to go too much into everything, but I do want to talk about a couple things that were mentioned that really caught my attention, and the first one being skill choice. From what Jeffrey Bard was explaining, he's the lead designer for the project, he was talking about the class's skill trees and how choices are going to matter greatly there. He mentioned the game is going to be very build-focused in character progression, and as you choose things from your skill tree, you lose access to other things. So in a sense, you're kind of heading down a limited action set, but by shutting off other routes and roles that your class could potentially fill. Nothing was said about how respecking would work and what that would kind of look like, but I'm curious to know everyone's thoughts in the comments. And from Theric and Minus here, does this sound too strict to you? Would you rather the restrictions on skills come from a limited bar and limited bar space, or the choices that you make while leveling up? Pantheon kind of has similar ideas behind the mastery points. You can augment only certain skills to certain levels, but you do get access to all of the skills as you level up. In Ash's creation, you really need to be sure of what you're picking for your identity and your role. I just want to know your thoughts, Theric.
I think it's a difficult path to go down it. So basically what they're saying, if I understand correctly, is they're making it so you can't respec. Now I know Pantheon,
I don't know if you can't respec. They just didn't mention respecking and how it would work. But yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine a game where you basically have no ability to respec once you're locked in. Even Pantheon, they've acknowledged that you will have the ability to respec. It may cost a lot of money, and it may have an increasing sort of cost the more you do it. I don't know, man. It'd be hard to be locked in like that without full information or without a real sort of preview of what you're selecting. So tough one.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Minus?
It's interesting. There's games, and I'm probably getting it wrong, but off the top of my head, I think of things like Pillars of Eternity and like maybe the original Divinity, where you couldn't respec, or maybe if you did, it was like super expensive and you really couldn't do it often. So in like
as you in Pillars of Eternity, it would become more expensive the higher level you got.
Yeah. There's single player games that definitely do it. I can't think off the top of my head of the games like when you're leveling, you need to know what you're doing. And it works okay for a single player game like that. I think it's a little more difficult in a game that's based on community and here's the thing, it's not to say that every class should be able to do every role, but every class should be able to do things within their role as they need to adjust. Now there should be a penalty. If there's respecking, it should be expensive. You need money sinks in games. It's a great money sink. It's a great way to control the economy. So that kind of stuff you do need. And I think that if what they're saying is like, you're going to go down this tree, this is how I read it. You're going to go down this tree and it's going to disable you from taking your next points and putting it into certain things because you've already specialized a certain way. And
yes.
And the way that I look at that is this, like maybe you pick some kind of, I don't know, stance, right? Well, you took this stance. So this stance you can't take anymore because that's the stance you specialized in. Like related abilities that would fill the same role, you have to specialize in them. That's the way I kind of read it. And I'm okay with that. But there should be a way to change when you need to change for the sake of your group, the sake of your guild, or maybe you're just not enjoying your playstyle anymore. I'd hate to see you have to make a new character.
Yeah, I would agree with you guys there. It does work, pretty well in single player games, but in MMOs where you want to be able to be a little bit fluid and have access to your full kit is important. Without seeing the skill tree, it's hard to say. If it's something like, if you're a warrior and you spec down two-handed versus sword and shield, and, if you go down sword and shield, then you can't really spec into two-handed, then that's, a little more easier to understand. But if you're specking down a mage and, you pick an area effect ice spell and that locks you out from a direct target ice spell, like I don't think I would like that myself. But moving on, I also want to talk about party size. It was talked about in a few streams before, but they are going with 8-player parties. They're doing this because of the 8 class archetypes in the game, and they want players to have the ability to have all class types represented in a party at one time. And they're also tuning their content with that in mind. So the gameplay they were showing was a low-level dungeon between levels 5 to 10 currently, and it was being tuned for Alpha 1 to be an 8-player dungeon. So in Ashes, there are the 8 archetypes, and then at a certain point, you get to choose a second archetype, and that second archetype will augment the skills of the first archetype. An example they always give is a warrior and a mage combo. So the warrior gets like a shield charge skill, and if you take the mage class as your second archetype, it turns that shield charge into like a blink charge that would teleport you instead of running in. Any class mix can be there. So there's essentially 64 different classes that are going to be in the game, which I think is pretty cool, but I think it might be a balancing nightmare too. We'll see. Next 2 points. It's kind of really one point into mana and resource management and the crowd control classes. Short and simple, crowd control will be a big thing in Ashes of Creation, and mana and resource management will be important to the fights too. They don't want the mana bar to just be this thing that you don't pay attention to, and they're also conscious of meaningful downtime. Stephen Sharif, the founder of Intrepid Studios, went on to talk about how in early discussions they talked about downtime, and at that point, sitting in between fights was going to be a part of the gameplay. And now they've really switched that up, and they've come up with different ways to maintain the pace of the game and still make mana management important. So they're trying to find that balance, and without hands-on, it's hard to say where that truly is at. But in the footage they played while they were taking questions, I was watching very intently at the player nameplates. I was watching for health spikes and their mana levels. They said at the start of the stream that they detuned the dungeon to be more manageable for a group of 5, because that's what they were playing with, and they were level 10 playing level 5 content. So the health bars didn't dip too much, but the mana really did. From the player's perspective was from a mage class, and they were checking out some mad spells all the time, and they were almost totally out of mana like for the whole video. It didn't look like they did anything special to get it back, though. They just kind of switched to a more melee-focused approach until they had their mana back, and then they switched back. But they were rarely ever out of action. And it's something you might notice if you do go and watch that video real close. You can see that player actively switching between an action control setup and tab target controls. So the tab targeting, it looks like it functions exactly as you'd expect. Like you have your mouse cursor to aim your AE spells and the tab to lock on, and then your regular hotbar stuff. And then if you look at the action bar, you'll see the first action is a blank slot, and it's bound to their Q key. And that's the default melee attack. So like kind of like the auto attack in other games, but this one's not automatic. You'll see them mashing it a lot. And then when they switch over to the action controls, a crosshair pops up on the screen, and they're no longer pressing Q to attack. And I think it's because the attack is changing over to the left click. And I'm really excited about this system. The only other games that I've played that kind of do this smoothly are Star Trek Online and sort of Guild Wars 2. And obviously, without having hands-on, it's hard to say if the system feels as good as it looks, but I'm pretty excited to try it and try the game in general. I think it will find its place in the MMO world, and I could talk for hours here about what I think the dev stream showed and how good it is, but we got to move on. So some other things they did talk about those, like crafting guilds, how guild officers are going to have specific skills. They talked about PvP caravans and how that's going to go from land to water transportation and the combat change. Some info on the 9 races. They showed some armor assets and a whole lot more. Moving on to Star Citizen. It went live into the 3.9 alpha this past week. And it's a patch I'm pretty excited for, but I haven't had a chance to play yet because I got to clear off some SSD space to reinstall it. But some new features worth talking about are the Kletcher Automated Prison. And I pulled this from a quote. And it says, actions have consequences. Players incapacitated by security forces or bounty hunters will now find themselves serving hard time in prison. So pay off your debt to society by doing manual labor or make plans for a daring escape. This is one of the most interesting systems being put into Star Citizen for me. You know, being a bandit now has serious consequences. You don't just get killed or your shit blown up by NPCs or other players and then you respawn and you go do it again. You get sent to an actual prison. While you're there, you have to go around and mine ore in the prison colony to pay off your bounty. Or you can band together with some other player prisoners and attempt to overpower the guards and steal a ship and, make your escape off the planet. Like I said, I haven't tried it yet, but when I do, I will definitely be putting my thoughts in the Discord. And anyone else who plays that game, let me know, because I haven't done any multiplayer stuff in it yet. They also added a new ship, the Asperia Prowler. It's sort of a stealth troop dropship, and they launched a pretty cool trailer with it. I will warn anyone who is interested in this game, it's not worth paying the real money dollars for these ships that they come up with and they sell. Like, just back the game at the lowest price, and I don't really like the Mustang. You get to pick between the Mustang or the Aurora, and I mean, pick whatever you want, but the Aurora is open to much more gameplay types, more mission types, because you can put physicalized cargo in it, and you can't do that with the Mustang. And you're able to rent ships in the game with in-game credits. So any ship that's in the game, you can actually rent and try out without having to spend real-world money on it. And if you want to try out a ship, like there's tons of people in there who've done that already, and just put it out in chat, and they'll let you borrow their ship because it's, it has lifetime insurance on it. It's not going to cost them anything if you crash it or lose it. Next up would be Defend the Night. They've uploaded just this morning another pretty sweet video for everyone to check out on their Twitter, showcasing some of the new animations. The tweet reads, quote, "Weekly update. We've been focused on our NPCs lately, so it's time to give some player controllers some love. New movement, combat animations for one-handed and shield, sound effects, particles, stance transitions, equip and unequip, and more." It's a nice short clip that shows off some of the combat and all that stuff that I just mentioned, so go to their Twitter and check it out.
I'll throw something in real quick there too. I've been talking a little bit with Lexer, and I did put our name in the hat when they start working on that assassin class. I'm like, I want to be talking about it. I want you guys on. We want a theory craft. Let us in. And we actually, they came to us, and this is one of the things I like about Defend the Night. Last week we talked about the Enchanter class, which you did a great job with, Omega, and they actually came to me after to really get some of our insight on it and talk about what we did like. Specifically the pet and how that would work. So these guys are really listening to feedback out there. If you're on their Discord, you can really be part of designing this game with them, at least from a feedback standpoint. So definitely join their Discord, guys. It's a really good time if you want to be really involved.
Yeah. And like, even in, I don't want to promote this if they don't want me to, but they take DMs really well too. Like if you just want to shoot them a direct message and not really get too involved in the Discord stuff, they'll respond, and they're really open to communication for sure. Camelot Unchained. If you're a backer, as of April 30th, you can jump in and play and test what's been changed. NathanNapalm has a really good video about this, so I won't really go into too much detail. Just go check his out. Anything I could say here, it's just said better by him anyways. He's experienced it. He's a really rad dude, so go check it out there. New World. They put out a new developer diary video outlining the PvP territory wars as well as the PvE invasions. The company is catching some pretty hilarious response from the community, though, in a lot of places for something one of the devs said in the video. When talking about the PvP and PvE systems, he stated that they bring a, quote, social dynamism that no other game has. And it's a pretty laughable statement. I mean, lots of games do things in a similar way to what New World is doing, so it'll be interesting to see what that dynamism is once the beta launches, which should hopefully be next month. If you get a chance to watch the video, you'll see some reused footage for sure, but most is new stuff that they captured in their work-from-home environment. Now, as someone who was really excited for the game, the video is a little disappointing for me. For a game that was originally supposed to be releasing at the end of this month, there's still quite a bit of polish that needs to be done. The animations are a little bit janky. Things like cannons shooting out cannonballs that, doesn't look like the cannonball actually came out of the cannon. Smoke trails that don't properly work and they just kind of sit there static in the air. It doesn't really look AAA like it's being touted as. All in all, though, the information that was shared was really cool, especially the PvE stuff, which is all that I care about. Go check out their video. Ping me in the Discord if anyone wants to talk a little deeper about the invasion system. Because, like most other things, I could talk for hours about it, but we got to be wrapping up here. Lastly, I want to talk about Mortal Online 2, the closed combat alpha. April 28th marked the beginning of the closed combat alpha, and it's a $150 closed combat alpha, I'll say, and its focus is entirely on the new combat changes. Pulling from a post on their website, it reads as this: the alpha is focused on combat and combat only. Players will join on a single server at specific times to test different combat scenarios. This will be very different from the final game and more like a regular multiplayer deathmatch. Not all weapons or combat styles will be available in every test. Instead, each patch will introduce some new weapons, armors, and styles to test out. The combat has changed a bit from Mortal Online 1, and we really need feedback from the community on these changes and the general feel of the new combat. And so there's a quick clip that you can check out, which I'll make sure to have in the link here, of a short duel, and the combat looks like they're going for that more realistic feel. I never played Mortal Online 1, so I'm not sure how different it's going to be. But if anyone has and they see that clip, let us know the big differences. As an MMO with that kind of combat, I don't think I'd have too much fun with it. Like, I don't like that tactical sword play too much. The game is very PvP as well, and that's not really for me. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of Gloria Victis, which I do have, but like I have less than 5 hours played in it. So that level of intricate sword play of like angling your blocks and, you know, timing your parries and stuff doesn't really work in an MMO for my taste. But I do want to know what you guys think. And Minus and Theric, have you guys ever played like a tactical, realistic medieval RPG like For Honor or Gloria Victis? Do you have any thoughts about Mortal Online 2? Have you checked it out at all? Minus, let me know.
No. I haven't checked it out at all. You know, For Honor, Glorious Victis, really, it seemed like when they want to do that type of combat, it's really about player versus player.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is obviously PvP, so you know you lose me pretty quick there. I think when you have level of accuracy needed, it makes the intricacy of boss fights in an MMO setting much lesser.
Right.
You know, you can say timing is intricate, but having these grand fights with these phase changes and standing here, and you can't really have that with all this level of like timing needed, like adding Twitch into MMOs. I'm just not a big fan of.
Right.
I'd like to see an MMO do this well. I don't think it's been done well up to this point. I haven't played either of the games you mentioned, For Honor or Gloria Victis. I think I played Mortal Online 1 for maybe 15 minutes. I just remember it being really hard to. I don't think it was fully finished when they actually released it. But yeah, no, like you say, that it would be nice to see a intricate level of sword play like this in an MMO, but I don't think it's there yet.
Right. All right. Well, that's all I got for the genre news.
Well, thanks again for checking us out here on The Rewind, and make sure to join us this Thursday as we sit down with Pantheon crafter creator Nefel as we discuss the topic of crafting on PantheonPlus U, and of course, we'll see you next time on The Rewind.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Be sure to follow Minus and all Pantheon Plus related content at Pantheon Plus on Twitter and Pantheon Plus on both Twitch and YouTube. Follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter, and be sure to follow Omega Contagion at Discord via the name Omega Contagion 6023, and of course in the Facebook group Pantheon MMORPG. Until next time.